This happened back when I was in my early 20s, during a time when my social circle was pretty small. It was basically just me and two close friends, Andrew and David. Most of our days were spent doing nothing special, just wandering through the forest near town, talking about life, or poking around places we had no real reason to explore. One evening, Andrew stopped by my place acting unusually excited. He told me about a strange, abandoned building that a friend of his had mentioned. According to him, it was hidden somewhere off a trail, deep in a wooded area not far from where we lived. Naturally, I asked what kind of building it was, but Andrew said his friend didn't know either, and apparently the guy had been too creeped out to even go near it. That alone was enough to grab my attention. I immediately called David and filled him in, and he was just as interested as we were. It was already around 5 in the evening, but the sun wouldn't be going down until closer to 7. If anything, we figured the fading light would only add to the experience. So Andrew and I grabbed a few essentials, flashlights, some snacks, and then drove over to David's apartment to pick him up. We left the car parked beside a small grocery store, only a couple minutes from where the woods began. From what Andrew had been told, there was a half-mile trail leading to a scenic overlook, and if you kept going past the end of that path and pushed into the trees, the abandoned building should be somewhere beyond it. With that in mind, we found the trailhead and started walking, passing a handful of people who were already heading back toward the parking area. At that point, I'll admit my excitement started to fade. The trail was busy enough that it made the whole thing feel less believable. If something creepy was really out there, how had none of us ever heard about it before? Still, we kept going and eventually reached the overlook. The sun hadn't fully set yet, but the forest around us was growing darker by the minute. We stopped briefly to pull out our flashlights, then stepped off the lookout area and continued deeper into the trees. After about 15 minutes of pushing through thick brush and uneven ground in the dim light, frustration started to set in. We hadn't seen anything. No building, no signs, nothing. "So, you're sure this isn't just some dumb prank?" David muttered, clearly annoyed. "No, I swear," Andrew replied quickly, doing his best to sound confident. The guy was serious. Almost immediately after he said that, we heard movement nearby, a bush rustling just off to the side. All three of us snapped our flashlights toward the sound. It startled me, seeing the branches shake as if something had just bolted away. But then, beyond that disturbed patch of brush, barely visible in the distance, our lights caught the outline of an old structure standing silently among the trees. That surge of adrenaline came rushing back, and without saying much, we all started moving toward the building. Up close, it felt completely out of place, like it had been dropped into the forest by mistake. It was small and utilitarian, the kind of structure you'd expect to see on a job site. Maybe it had once been some sort of workshop or storage shed. I couldn't really tell. The front door wasn't even attached anymore. It was lying flat on the ground just outside the entrance, and we stepped over it as we went in. The second we crossed the threshold, a foul, gut-turning stench slammed into us. It was so bad it made my eyes water. We all exchanged uneasy looks, clearly nervous but unable to fight our curiosity. Inside, the ground floor was split into 3 separate rooms. The first was wide open, dominated by a massive wooden table or workbench. Trash was scattered everywhere, and old tools, covered in thick rust, had been abandoned where they last fell. David headed down the narrow hallway toward the remaining 2 rooms, and I followed close behind. Both doors were shut. With every step closer, the smell grew stronger, almost suffocating. Andrew stopped short, pulling his shirt up over his nose. "Guys, we should go," he said, his voice tense. "This smell is unreal," he added, sweeping his flashlight around as if expecting something to move. We brushed him off, though my stomach had started to knot up. I turned my flashlight toward the second door and moved a little closer, while David pushed open the other one and stepped inside. What happened next was instant. David let out a sharp, panicked scream and stumbled backward into the hallway, nearly knocking us over. At the same time, heavy banging noises erupted from behind the third closed door. Several loud thuds that echoed through the entire building. That was all it took. We bolted. None of us said a word as we ran, not stopping until we were well outside and completely winded. "What the hell was that?" Andrew gasped, struggling to catch his breath. David looked pale, almost shaking. "There was someone in there," he said. "There was a body on the floor. I swear, there was a body." David completely lost it. He kept spinning around, scanning the trees like he expected someone to come running at us. But the look in his eyes said everything. Whatever he'd seen in that room had genuinely shaken him. I told both of them that we couldn't stop, that we needed to keep moving. I was convinced someone else had been inside that building with us, hiding behind that last door. So we just ran, following the only direction we knew would eventually take us back to the road. We made it out of the woods faster than I thought possible. Once we reached the car, I didn't hesitate. I drove straight to the police station, a few blocks away, and told them exactly what had happened. The officer who took our statement barely tried to hide his irritation. He looked at us like we were idiots for even going out there in the first place. And sure, maybe it wasn't the smartest decision, but we had just told him we might have stumbled onto a murder scene. His attitude felt completely out of place. After some back and forth, they finally sent a couple of officers to check the location. We stayed parked outside the station, waiting in the car for what felt like forever. Nearly 2 hours passed before I got a call telling us to come back inside and speak with several officers. They told us they'd found traces of blood and clear signs that someone had been using the building recently, but there was no body. That seemed to change their tone completely. They started taking the situation seriously, asking us more detailed questions and going over everything again. A few weeks later, we got an update. Investigators had discovered what they believed was the body David had seen, buried poorly several hundred feet away from the abandoned structure. From what they explained, the person had already been dead before being taken to the building. It sounded like the place had only been used temporarily, before whoever did it moved the body elsewhere. As far as I know, the case never really went anywhere after that. I don't think they ever identified any solid suspects. But the whole experience stuck with me. Even now, thinking about how close we may have been to someone capable of something like that still sends a chill through me. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. If you know anything about Detroit, you know it's packed with abandoned buildings, probably more than almost anywhere else in the country. I never really questioned why. It was just normal to me. I spent my childhood in neighborhoods right next to these crumbling, forgotten places, so seeing boarded-up houses and empty structures was something I was used to. People would hang out in them, explore them, or just use them as places to kill time. That was just how things were. When I was in middle school, I had a close friend. I'll call him Philip. Around that age, the two of us became obsessed with those abandoned buildings. We'd talk about who used to live there, why they were left behind, and what might still be inside them, untouched for years. We knew it wasn't exactly safe to be poking around places like that. But we were newly minted teenagers, and for some reason that made us feel fearless, like nothing bad could actually happen to us. We were aware that gangs sometimes used clusters of abandoned homes as hangout spots, so we stayed far away from those areas. Instead, we focused on the more isolated buildings, the ones tucked away near wooded areas. Over the next few months, those became our targets. We'd usually stick with one spot for a few weeks, turning it into our unofficial hangout before getting bored and moving on. We'd already gone through 3 or 4 places like that when things took a turn. One afternoon, Philip and I were walking down an old, cracked concrete road that cut through overgrown brush. It led to a handful of abandoned houses we'd already explored before. This time, though, we decided to keep going, hoping to find somewhere new. Normally, the houses along that road were spaced just a minute apart. But as we walked, we realized we'd been moving for nearly 5 minutes without seeing a single building. That alone should have made us turn back, but the path was still there, still paved. It had to be going somewhere. After another 5 minutes, the concrete finally ended, but a narrow gravel trail continued forward into the trees. All we could see ahead was forest, but we were convinced the trail wouldn't exist unless it led to something. So we kept going. A minute or two later, we finally saw it, a house. It looked strange, almost like a townhouse, which made no sense given how isolated it was. Every window was boarded shut. The front door was closed tight. The only possible entry point was the garage, which was slightly lifted, leaving just enough space at the bottom to crawl through. Philip slammed his fist against the metal garage door a few times, making sure it wasn't about to come crashing down. Once he was satisfied, we both dropped to our knees and slid underneath. The garage itself was empty, just dirt, trash, and the smell of neglect. The door leading into the house was shut. I leaned into it, twisting the knob and pushing as hard as I could, but it wouldn't move. Philip joined me, and together we managed to force it open just enough for us to squeeze inside. The first thing that caught our attention was a massive dresser shoved directly against the door we'd just forced open. Philip and I looked at each other, confused, before climbing over it and stepping farther inside. We ended up in the kitchen, and from there we could see a hallway stretching deeper into the house. At the end of it were stairs leading upstairs, and off to the side what appeared to be a living room. What didn't make sense was how intact everything looked. The place wasn't trashed at all, barely any garbage, no obvious signs of vandalism. It was surprisingly clean. Still, it was obvious we weren't the first ones there. Dust covered the wooden floors, and it was littered with footprints going in different directions. As we started down the hallway, a faint thump echoed from somewhere on the opposite side of the house. It sounded like something small hitting the floor. We froze immediately, trading uneasy looks, standing perfectly still as we waited to hear if anything else would happen. I don't know what Philip was thinking, but I could feel panic starting to creep in. The front door was only a short distance ahead of us. After a few long seconds of complete silence, I slowly began walking toward it. I hadn't even made it halfway when an ear-splitting screech of metal scraping against metal ripped through the house. A split second later, a thunderous crash came from the garage. I yanked the front door open and we ran. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst, adrenaline flooding my body as we tore back down the path. When we reached it, I glanced over my shoulder, and that's when I saw it. The garage door was completely shut. We didn't slow down after that. We ran nearly the entire way back to Philip's house. Neither of us could explain what had just happened. Philip tried to brush it off, saying it was probably just bad timing, the garage door finally giving way while we happened to be inside. But that explanation never sat right with me. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that the place had been set up intentionally, like someone expected people to crawl in through the garage and wanted to trap them inside. Why else would the interior door be blocked with a dresser while a broken garage door was left hanging open? I don't know if whoever did it thought we were still inside when they shut it, or if they already knew we'd escaped and just wanted to scare us. Either way, we never went back to find out. After that, we made a rule: no more exploring places buried deep in the woods. We stuck to buildings closer to home, where at least someone might hear us if things went wrong. My best friend, Jack, and I always had our little hideaways, spots where we could escape the rest of the world. Sometimes it was a quiet corner of the schoolyard, other times the nearby skate park. Whenever we were fed up with adults hovering over us, or tired of dealing with siblings, we'd grab our comics and disappear for a while. After a few years, we even built a treehouse in Jack's backyard, which became our main retreat. But whenever his younger brother tried to join us and we couldn't, kick him out because his mom was around. We'd often retreat into the woods instead. Equipped with our books and flashlights, we'd spend entire days exploring. Over time, the treehouse became less ours and more his brother's, often filled with him and his friends. Jack's mom eventually said we were getting too old for it anyway, which we strongly disagreed with. Still, we had no choice but to find a new hideout. One day, we packed up our things and ventured deeper into the woods than ever before, searching for the perfect spot. We tried to build a new shelter, but it never matched the charm or comfort of the treehouse. We left disappointed. The next day, my mom sent us back into the woods to walk our dog, Sammy. Determined to try again, we went even further. Sammy, however, didn't share our enthusiasm. He wandered off, never waiting for us while we examined potential spots. At one point, he ran off and didn't come back. Jack noticed first, and after half an hour of calling, whistling and searching, I panicked and called my mom. She reassured me it wasn't a big deal. Sammy always came back eventually, and sure enough, he did. We kept walking, even as twilight crept in. We turned on our flashlights when Jack suddenly stopped. He said he heard barking, and standing in silence, I picked it up too. We followed the sound and found Sammy in front of a small stone building, barking at nothing. "Found something, buddy?" I asked. "We've been looking everywhere for you." I clipped the leash back on Sammy, who continued to growl at the building. We started heading back, but took one last look at it. Somehow, we both agreed that Sammy had helped us stumble upon a potential hideout. The next day, after finishing homework and dinner, we returned, this time at twilight, carrying only our flashlights, phones, and extra batteries. The stone building was odd, almost square, a single structure with a corrugated iron roof, a creaking metal door, and no windows. It felt isolated and promising. Inside, there was nothing, just the cold stone floor stretching across the space. The next day, we brought in some old blankets, cushions, and even a small battery-powered lamp. The treehouse had been completely abandoned, forgotten while we spent the last warm days of summer tucked inside the little stone building, with the metal door wide open, reading and hanging out. When fall rolled around, we shut the door without a second thought. The darkness outside didn't bother us. It was just part of the season. Over time, we made the interior our own. We strung up a garland of tiny lights above our heads and hung posters on the walls. To us, this hideout felt permanent, a place we could call ours for years. We went there almost every day, no matter the weather. In fact, rainy days were the best. The steady patter of raindrops on the metal roof created the perfect background rhythm as we listened to our music through headphones, each lost in our own little world. One afternoon, we were sprawled on the cushions, schoolwork abandoned in the corner, listening to the same music on my phone. A storm had rolled in, rain pouring hard and winds howling around the building. Eventually, my phone died, leaving us in silence. Jack began humming to himself, doing his best to ignore homework. But suddenly the door creaked. He froze mid-hum. We both stared at the entrance, exchanging uneasy glances. I tried to brush it off and reached for my notebook, but then we heard footsteps circling the back of the building. Both of us stiffened, hearts racing. I hoped it was just someone wandering through the woods, but the storm was heavy and we were deep in the forest. Before we could even speak, the footsteps turned into a frantic run around the building, and the door slammed open. Wind and rain burst inside, drenching us instantly. Jack screamed, and I was just as terrified. Frozen in place, we peered into the darkness of the woods. After a tense moment, we realized no one was there. At least, not anymore. I finally managed to stand and shut the door, both of us shaken to our cores. We agreed it was best to leave, and when we got home, soaked to the bone, we decided never to return to the hideout after dark. To this day, we haven't gone back, and we have no intention of ever finding out who opened that door that night.